At some point in the late 2000s, satellite images of a city in northern China began circulating online. Wide boulevards stretched to the horizon. Civic plazas the size of small towns sat empty. Thousands of apartment towers stood finished, glazed and dark. The city had every physical ingredient of a modern metropolis and almost none of the people. The world called it a ghost city, and the name stuck. But what those images could not show was whether the story was finished or just beginning. Kangbashi is an urban district of the prefecture-level city of Ordos, located in the Inner Mongolia autonomous region of China. Ordos as a whole sits atop one of the largest coal fields in the country. Through the late 1990s and into the 2000s, coal revenues transformed the regional economy at extraordinary speed. Local government coffers filled faster than any existing infrastructure could absorb. The decision was made to build not just new roads or public facilities, but an entirely new administrative and cultural center, a purpose-built district that would anchor Ordos as a modern city worthy of its sudden wealth. The logic behind that decision was not irrational. Older parts of Ordos were congested, their layouts unsuited to the scale of ambition that new revenues seemed to justify. Planners chose a site roughly 25 kilometers south of the existing urban core and laid out Kangbashi on a clean grid. Government offices, a museum, a library, a theater, an equestrian statue of Genghis Khan large enough to serve as a city landmark. All of it went in first, before the residents. The infrastructure was real, the buildings were built, the intention was that people and commerce would follow the institutions. That sequence, build first, populate later, is the hinge on which the entire story turns. Urban planning has a long record of new towns and purpose-built capitals that took decades to reach their intended population. Canberra, Brasília, Abuja, none of them filled on schedule, and all of them endured years of commentary about emptiness before maturation set in. What made Kangbashi unusual was the speed of construction relative to the demand signals actually present, and the degree to which property speculation, rather than residential need, drove early purchasing. During the coal boom, real estate in Kangbashi became an investment vehicle. Buyers across Inner Mongolia and beyond purchased apartments not to live in them, but to hold them as assets. This was not unique to Ordos. Across China during that decade, newly built urban apartments frequently sat unoccupied for extended periods as part of a broader pattern in which property functioned more like a savings instrument than a home. The difference in Kangbashi was visibility. Because the district had been built so rapidly, so completely, and in such isolation from any existing population center, the vacancy was total rather than scattered. A camera pointed at any block told the same story. The images that circulated globally between roughly 2009 and 2013 captured a real condition. Kangbashi was genuinely underpopulated relative to its capacity. Streets were quiet, shops had no customers, the government buildings operated, but the surrounding residential fabric was largely still. Journalists and photographers who visited during those years reported accurately on what they saw. The ghost city framing was not invented. The question that framing left unanswered was whether vacancy was permanent or transitional. By the early 2010s, authorities in Ordos were taking active steps to close the gap between capacity and population. Schools were built and staffed, hospitals were established. Government employees were formally relocated from the old urban core to Kangbashi. Incentive policies encouraged businesses and institutions to establish presences in the district. These were not cosmetic measures. Functioning civic infrastructure changes the calculus for household relocation in ways that empty apartment towers do not. A family will not move to a district with no schools, regardless of how affordable the housing is. The coal economy that funded Kangbashi's construction did not remain stable. Commodity prices fell. The speculative property market that had inflated land values and driven over-purchasing corrected sharply. Ordos as a whole experienced significant economic stress in the early 2010s, with defaults, unfinished projects, and considerable financial hardship among residents who had borrowed heavily to invest in property. This was a genuine cost borne by real people, and it runs parallel to the ghost city narrative without being identical to it. The emptiness of Kangbashi and the financial distress of Ordos were related but separate phenomena. The counterpoint to the ghost city story comes from what happened next, and from the limits of what outside observers could verify. Population figures for Chinese administrative districts are reported through official channels, and independent verification of occupancy rates in any specific residential development is difficult. What is documented is that Kangbashi's status as a completely vacant district did not persist. By the mid-2010s, observers returning to the area reported substantially more activity than the earliest photographs suggested. Businesses had opened, roads carried traffic, schools were in session. How full Kangbashi became, and by what measure, remained a subject of genuine uncertainty. Claims that it had fully rebounded to match its designed capacity were not independently verifiable from the sources available. Claims that it remained a frozen monument to failed planning were equally unsupported by the documented trajectory. The honest account sits between those poles. A district built far ahead of organic demand, stressed by the collapse of the speculative market that financed it, and then subject to a long, uneven process of gradual occupation driven by policy intervention rather than spontaneous growth. What Kangbashi illustrates most clearly is a specific planning failure that is easy to identify in retrospect and genuinely difficult to avoid in practice. When a government uses a commodity windfall to build permanent urban infrastructure, it is making a bet that the windfall will persist long enough for the city to mature. Kangbashi was designed for a population and an economy that coal revenues were supposed to deliver. When coal prices fell and the speculative property boom unwound, the population and the economy were not there to sustain what had been built. The district did not fail because it was poorly designed. It was stressed because the economic foundation beneath it was removed before the city could develop the diverse, self-sustaining activity that makes urban places resilient. A workable alternative would not have been slower construction alone. It would have required sequencing demand and supply more closely, building civic infrastructure incrementally as population arrived, rather than in full anticipation of population that had not yet committed to moving. It would have required distinguishing between investment-driven property purchasing and genuine household relocation when projecting occupancy timelines. And it would have required a financing structure less dependent on a single commodity whose price was outside local control. The ghost city images of Kangbashi became one of the most widely reproduced documents of Chinese urbanization. They were accurate as photographs and incomplete as analysis. They showed a moment in the life of a place that had not yet become what it was built to be. Whether that place ever fully became what was intended for, it remains, on the available evidence, genuinely open. What is not open is the mechanism. Build faster than demand, finance with volatile revenue, and the gap between capacity and population becomes visible to the entire world. Close that gap slowly, with policy rather than organic growth, and the story becomes harder to resolve into a clean ending. That difficulty, the gap between the image and the full arc, is the thing the ghost city story never quite resolved. Kangbashi did not vanish. It did not complete itself on schedule. It became something more complicated than either the promotional vision or the viral photograph suggested. And that complexity is, in its own way, the more useful lesson. Cities built on single economic bets are fragile, not because their planners lacked skill, but because the world that was supposed to validate those bets did not hold still long enough. Visual reconstructions are illustrative. Facts and interpretations are based on the sources listed in the description.